is the cost of living crisis over? It doesn't really feel that way, does it? Even though economists tell us that inflation is dropping down again. Part of the reason for that is there's a lot going on beneath the surface, and I want to show you a few of those things, starting with inflation. Okay, and this is the chart that's inflation, but it's not maybe the inflation chart that you typically tend to see, because rather than looking at the annual change in prices, which is what inflation economists tend to mean by inflation, this is looking at the level of the price of goods. So the basket of goods and services we buy on a daily basis, this is how that's changed over time. And when economists look at inflation, when they talk about inflation, when the Bank of England talks about inflation, they're generally referring to the change over the past year. And you can see the difference between that and that. Well, that amounts to about 3 and a bit percent, 3.4%, the latest numbers. But when you and I go to the supermarket, we're typically not just thinking back at what's happened to prices in the last year. You're kind of thinking about what's happened to them in recent memory. And if you look back in recent memory, say the last 4 years, it's up by 25%. So partly it's this perceptual thing. You know, annual inflation may be going down, but actual inflation that we experience, that's still really high. But partly it's because there's a lot of other things going on as well. That's showing you inflation, but you've also got earnings. They're changing over the same period as well. You've got taxes going up as well. How does it all fit together? Well, let me just give you a kind of sense of this. And what this is showing you is imagining in the future you've got about 10% increases over the next few years, which is what the OBR thinks is likely, for all different spectrum, parts of the income spectrum. So through from the poorest through to the richest. Look at what happens when you take into account inflation. So that's 10% up in nominal terms, but you've got to adjust for the fact that inflation digs into that. Assume that inflation is basically hitting everyone equally, which of course it doesn't in practice. I'll show you that in a sec. But even if you assume that, those bars go down from 10% to 2.5%. But on top of that, you've got tax increases as well. So higher national insurance, you've got the fact that those tax thresholds are frozen as well. Take that into account and look at these bars. So for the poorest, it's basically, you're seeing your real take-home pay frozen, flatlining. £50,000 because you've got these different tax thresholds, it kind of kicks in unequally. That's kind of basically flatlining as well. But that's not everything. On top of that, you've got to take into account higher council tax, and then when you put that into the equation as well, look, those on £50,000 actually seeing it falling in terms of their real take-home pay. Similar thing, even greater for those on £13,000 when council tax is taken into account. So that shows you that inflation is only one part of this story. What we're feeling and what we're feeling in our pockets is a very different story. And that is only one part. That's kind of it gets more complex than that. Because if you look, for instance, that last one just broke it down by income brackets, but you can break it down even further. You can look at people's different circumstances. So what about the difference between pensioners? What about the difference between people who own properties and not? That's looking at the overall increase in that period, real household disposable income. But now, after housing costs, which are pretty expensive, per person, including pensioners, it's going up, so it looks like it's better. But why is that? It's partly because a lot of people who own their home outright, particularly pensioners, don't have to pay as much in housing costs. For those who are not pensioners, particularly people who are private renting, particularly people who are paying mortgages, actually over that same period you're seeing the amount of take-home pay going down. So again, it depends on your circumstances. It might be that you are seeing your take-home pay go down, partly because of inflation, partly because of taxes, partly because of other factors as well. And I said a moment ago, everyone's experience of inflation is actually kind of different. That's true, okay? This is showing you the proportion of your of inflation, of your spending that goes on different essential items. So stuff like food and drink, clothing, footwear, childcare, household bills. And for low to middle income households, look at how high those layers are, and now compare it to higher income households, which is over there. You see the issue here. So for lower income households, you're spending more of your average spending on essentials, which is not the case for higher income households. And that's changed, it's evolved over the years, okay? So another way of showing basically the same thing. So from poorest fifth to the richest fifth, showing just how much of that total spending goes on essentials. That was in 2006. Look at these bars. They have gone up over the years. So particularly, look over here, the poorest fifth, in the last year or so, that bar has gone above the 50% point. So now you're spending more than a fifth of your spending on essentials because the price of those essentials has gone up, and it's not equal across the income spectrum. So all of this stuff feeds in. It all feeds in, and it's worth just saying, when it comes to the kind of the nature of inflation and just how things have changed, inflation has kind of become less equal as well. What this is showing you is from 2007 to 2019, how has inflation impacted from the poorest through to the richest? And the thing to kind of note about this is that line is relatively flat. So it's been a kind of equal experience, or at least there was an equal experience up until 2019 in terms of how inflation affected people overall. But now look at the last few years, and that line is very different, isn't it? So it's higher for those in lower income deciles, so lower earners, and it's lower for richer, for bigger earners. You can see if those who are poorer have had to face higher inflation in recent years, which wasn't the case before. And of course, it depends on the kinds of things you're spending money on. But dig into the kinds of things that we do spend money on, and there are certain things that you can't really avoid that are going up quite a lot, like power, like electricity. So this is showing you the UK and how it compares to kind of other developed economies in terms of our electricity costs. And look, red line is the UK. I'm going to bring it on there. And just look how striking that is. We used to be kind of middle of the pack for a lot of recent years. And in the last year, the UK has gone up to be the highest cost domestic kind of power nation around the world. So that's electricity. Worth saying, a lot of focus on that recently. When it comes to food, actually, this is a comparatively cheap country. It may not feel like it a lot of the time, but actually, same thing again. We're comparing the UK with other G7 nations, and actually the UK is cheaper than the average of other G7 nations. So we pay much more for power, but not much less, but less certainly when it comes to food. Of course, those aren't the only essentials. There are other essentials that you need to think about. One that we're going to be talking about quite a lot in the next few months is water. And this is showing you just how much extra water bills are going to dig into people's earnings, again, from the richest through to the poorest. Those red bars are showing you just the cash amount that's going to come out of your bill or kind of go on top of your bill in the coming years. But of course, cash doesn't tell you the full story. You need to look at it as a percentage of what you're actually spending. And if you look at it that way, the line here, it's very different. The richest, of course, spend in terms of the proportionate increase, spending the least, whereas it's poorer families who are going to be paying more as a share of their income when it comes to these extra water bills. So you can see how it all tots up. And the overall picture that we're left with, it's quite striking. Take it all into account, okay, and this is showing you who's getting better off, worse off in the coming years, different household groups. And here's something quite striking. Look, pensioners are seeing their real household disposable income going up, or at least projected to go up in the coming years. For children, it's going down. And again, we can break it down even further. Social renters, those who own outright, working age, owning with a mortgage, going up gradually, and children, and indeed also private renters, seeing their amount of real household disposable income going down over that period, underlining that for many people, yes, the cost of living crisis is still very real, and it's going to feel real for quite some time.